So our gospel reading for today is better known as the Beatitudes, and it comes up in the lectionary every year. So we actually just heard Luke's version of the Beatitudes back in November, for all of you who were sitting there thinking, hey, didn't we just hear this one? And for any of you who are sitting there thinking, I feel like we just heard this one, but this one feels a little different, you would also be correct. Because the versions in Matthew and Luke are slightly different from one another. Today's version from Matthew has 8 blessings, whereas the one in Luke is the slightly spicier version, because in addition to its 4 blessings, it includes also 4 woes. And let me tell you, nothing makes you feel more like a prophet of old or a fire and brimstone preacher than standing up behind a pulpit saying a sentence that begins with, "Woe to you." It's a real trip. If you want to come up and give it a try after service, please be my guest. Do we have any takers, Pastor Laura, at the first service? Oh, man. Well, maybe you all can change that. You know, as Justin pointed out, it's an odd word, the Beatitudes. And in part that's because it comes from the Latin word beatus or beatus, which is where we get the English word for blessed. And while I was doing research on that word, I came across an interesting little side tangent, which was that in the Catholic Church, there was actually a person named Saint Beatus, which, given that saint already means holy one, felt a little redundant to me. You know, kind of like the La Brea tar pits, where if you translate the French part, you get the tartar pits. But anyway, this Saint Beatus was said to have been born in Ireland, and when he converted to Christianity, he became the first apostle to Switzerland, setting up his hermitage in a large system of caves near Interlaken in the mountains above Lake Thun. And those caves are now known as the St. Beatus Caves, and Alyssa and I went there when we were on our honeymoon. You can see, this is the picture from the outside. It's just gorgeous. Luckily, St. Beatus had already defeated the fire-breathing dragon that was said to have lived there, so we were just free to enjoy the beautiful scenery and all of the underground water features that are there. There's about 14 kilometers worth of caves, and 1 kilometer worth is paved and lighted for people to enjoy. And this picture of me and Alyssa is at the furthest back section you can go. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes of walking underground to reach that point. And it took me up until this sermon to connect that trip to the St. Beatus Caves with that word, Beatus, where we get the Beatitudes from. Well, I'll tell you that it certainly felt like a blessed experience while we were there. But in addition, hi, Nutmeg. All are welcome at Bethlehem, as we always say. Aww. So in addition to being translated as blessed, that word beatus, can also be translated as happy, which is how it appears in the Good News Bible translation, which results, honestly, in some very confusing sentences, like, happy are those who mourn, and happy are those who are persecuted. I get this image in my head of Inigo Montoya leaning in close to Jesus saying, I do not think that word means what you think it means. And then it gets even more confusing when you look at the word that appears in the original Greek, which is makarios. That word can be translated as flourishing, fortunate, to be envied. Now, I don't know about you, but the people that I tend to envy, and yes, I know, according to the 9th and 10th commandments, we're not supposed to envy anyone or anything, but we're all human. But regardless, the list of people that we have today couldn't be further from the list of people that I tend to envy. Nor could it be further from how I understand what it means to be blessed, or flourishing, or happy, or fortunate, or whatever translation you want to use. These are just not the people that come to mind when we think about what it means to live a blessed life. Not now, and not even back in Jesus' time. Because, to be fair, sometimes the things that Jesus says are confusing to us because we don't have all of the context clues that his original audience would have. But sometimes Jesus' words are just plain confusing no matter what era of history you find yourselves in. And this is the latter of those two options. But as we heard in the first reading from Corinthians today, God has made foolish the so-called wisdom of this world. Wisdom that in our time as well as back in Jesus' time associates being blessed with things like material wealth, good health, overall prosperity. This notion that those who have amazing things and an amazing life must have them because they are favored by God. It's one of the key tenets of the prosperity gospel that is espoused by many fundamentalist preachers. And to be honest, that part of the theory isn't actually all that bad. It is good stewardship to attribute the blessings in our lives to God, to realize that everything that we have is a gift from God. Look at me, using the S word 2 sermons in a row, and it's not even our fall stewardship emphasis. I hope you were proud, Mark. But the problem, with the prosperity gospel perspective arises when we look at the flip side of things. When we start saying things like people who don't have a lot of things, or people who are going through tough times, well, they must have done something to upset God. And they are experiencing those things as a form of punishment, or because God has withdrawn her favor from them. But there is no room for that kind of victim blaming in the teachings of Jesus. And so he decides to flip the script. He redefines how we understand the notion of being blessed, what it means to be a recipient of God's favor. This passage marks the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which spans 3 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, and it covers some of his most famous teachings. Love your enemies, be salt and light, the Lord's Prayer. Attend to the plank in your own eye before going after the speck in your neighbor's, and many more. And unlike in the other Gospels, in Matthew, this is Jesus' first major speaking opportunity. This is where he sets the tone for his ministry. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount basically represents his thesis statement for his ministry. And in that line of thinking, the Beatitudes are the thesis statement of the Sermon on the Mount. These 8 blessings act as his mission statement. Now, right off the bat, it's important to realize that these statements are not meant to be seen as Jesus trying to reverse or undo the state of being that these 8 groups of people find themselves in. For instance, Jesus is not saying, "You who mourn, blessed are you. Do not worry, don't be sad, because you're actually blessed, so you should just be happy. Quit moping around and just be happy." No, Jesus is not saying that. These 8 statements are meant to serve as a roadmap to where Jesus' ministry is headed. These are the people that Jesus will prioritize. These are the behaviors that he will emphasize and laud. These are the voices that he will center, and these are the ones for whom he has come. Jesus came to minister to the poor in spirit, to those who mourn, to those who are meek. His followers shall be people who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They will be merciful and pure in heart. They will work for peace, and inevitably many of them will be persecuted because of their allegiance to Jesus and their dedication to following his ways. If you want to know who and what matters to Jesus, look no further than these 12 verses. They will tell you everything that you need to know. But again, some of them are a little more straightforward than others. So I want to take just a minute to unpack some of them. Like, what exactly does it mean to be poor in spirit? My Lutheran study Bible says that those who are poor in spirit includes those who are brokenhearted or crushed in spirit. Other scholars define that term to mean those who recognize their deep and utter reliance on God. So in other words, blessed are those who realize their deep-seated need for God, and those who see that our salvation has nothing to do with us, but everything to do with the amazing, never-ending, unconditional love and grace that God pours into our lives. The other one that really gives me trouble is blessed are the meek. This might be one of the most inappropriately and incorrectly used Bible passages of all time, because for centuries it was used to keep suffering, oppressed people in their place. It was used by those in power to slap down, clap back at anyone who tried to challenge them or challenge the status quo. And what's a person in power to do when someone gets a little too big for their britches? Or those people who ask for a few too many basic human rights, or have the audacity to want to be treated with equity or demand justice? Hit them with a blessed are the meek. And you're not acting very meek right now, and so I think you're making God angry with what you're doing, so you better stop. Let me state with unequivocal clarity that that is not what Jesus is trying to say here. That way of understanding meekness equates it with subservience, with weakness, which again, the first Corinthians reading had something to say about. But it implies almost this person who tries to make themselves as small as they can, so that they don't take up any more space than they need to. But when Jesus talks about the word meek, he is referring to those who experience oppression, exploitation, those who are denied their fair share of the resources of this world, which is why that is what he promises to them. Jesus says in this new world order, in the kingdom of heaven, in his work of his ministry, those who have been denied those things shall inherit what is rightfully theirs, whether that be material goods or equality or justice or simply the respect that is due to all beings that are made in the image of God. And that leads us nicely into those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, those who are reviled on account of Jesus. Because when you fight back against the powers of this world, when you confront the systemic sin and evil that is embedded in our society and in the world around us, when you seek to give voice to the voiceless, protest against the exploitation and poor treatment of the most vulnerable, the meek, as Jesus would call them, when you push back and try to take up space, those who are in positions of power and privilege will not give up that space without a fight. And so this was Jesus' way of saying that living in the way that he calls us to live will oftentimes put us directly at odds with how the world wants us to behave. Valuing and prioritizing the things that Jesus cares about will challenge and scare and even anger those who cling to earthly power, the empire, Roman or otherwise, those who have been calling the shots and deciding who has worth and who doesn't. And in those moments where we face pushback for living into who Jesus calls us to be, we are reminded that we have God's everlasting, abiding presence in our lives to strengthen and encourage and uplift us to help us carry on. Which brings me to the last thing that I want to say about the Beatitudes, and that is that fundamentally, they should be heard as a word of hope. When we are feeling at our lowest, our most vulnerable, our weakest and most broken, these words stand as a beacon of hope that declares that God has not abandoned us or withdrawn his favor from us. No matter our lot in life, we are still beloved beyond measure. There's so much going on in the world these days that fills my heart with fear and despair, anger, and leaves me uncertain of where to turn and what to do. The Beatitudes remind us that no matter what state of being we find ourselves in, we are always held in the blessedness of God's favor. So blessed are you when you are so angry that you can't see straight. Blessed are you when your grief feels like someone has parked a truck on your chest. Blessed are you when you feel like you just can't get out of bed, and yet you do. And blessed are you on the days when, try as you might, you just can't do anything but roll over and say, I'm going to try again tomorrow. Blessed are you when your heart breaks open every time you read the headlines. And blessed are you when you just can't bring yourself to open the paper or your phone that day. Blessed are you when you think things can't get any worse, only to be proven wrong a few days later. And blessed are you when blessedly things do take a turn for the good, no matter how small that might be. Blessed are you when you prioritize love over hate, hope over fear, and hospitality over hostility. Blessed are you when you find joy in the little things, when you count your blessings and lose track. Blessed are you when you let someone merge in at the last second, even though you know that they should have gotten in line way back there with everyone else. Blessed are you when you build bridges and tear down walls. Blessed are you when you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Blessed are you, dear people of Bethlehem. Amen.